as we've worked our way through 24 and 25 these last couple of months. Matthew 25, beginning in verse 1. Then the kingdom of heaven will be like 10 virgins who took their lamps and went to meet the bridegroom. 5 of them were foolish and 5 were wise. For when the foolish took their lamps, they took no oil with them, but the wise took flasks of oil with their lamps. As the bridegroom was delayed, they all became drowsy and slept. Then at midnight there was a cry, "Here is the bridegroom, come out to meet him." Then all those virgins rose and trimmed their lamps. And the foolish said to the wise, "Give us some of your oil, for our lamps are going out." But the wise answered, saying, "Since there will not be enough for us and for you, go rather to the dealers and buy for yourselves." And while they were going to buy, the bridegroom came, and those who were ready went in with him to the marriage feast, and the door was shut. Afterward, the other virgins came also, saying, "Lord, Lord, open to us." But he answered, "Truly I say to you, I do not know you. Watch therefore, for you know neither the day nor the hour." A few months ago in Germany, or quite a few months ago now, earlier in the year, they had these floods that came and had nearly 200 deaths and over 700 people injured, with property damaged and all these things. And there was criticism of the government of Germany, and the criticism was, why were they not prepared? Why were they not prepared for the flood that was coming? Now, the criticism wasn't that they didn't make any preparations. The criticism was that the plan that they had was terribly inadequate. It wasn't what was required for the type of floods that were coming. They've seen floods in the past. They've had storms in the past. They knew it was going to happen again. They knew it could do incredible damage. And the plans they made did not hold up when the storm came. This is the warning that Jesus is giving in this passage and in this section of Matthew as he answers the disciples' question of when will he return? When will he come and establish his kingdom? When will judgment come upon those who do not believe? That is what all of this is about. To answer their question of when, verse 36, Jesus makes it very clear that the simple answer is you cannot know. You cannot know when the end is coming. Therefore, he spends the rest of chapter 24 and into chapter 25, even to verse 30, saying, be prepared. Be ready, be watchful, be alert, be prepared to stand before Christ. Be prepared to stand before Christ. There are plenty of people who, if you ask them, are you ready to die? They may, for different reasons, say yes. For some for good reasons, some for bad reasons. That yes, I am ready to die. But as Jesus says, few are prepared. Few are prepared. And so he is talking to his disciples and really warning them. Okay, you be prepared. Most people will not be prepared to see Christ, but you, my disciples, make sure that you are awake, you are alert, you are ready for that day. Whether that is Christ coming back to earth or you going to stand before him, leaving this world. And all that is laid out in this section, particularly through parables. He uses parables to make his point. In verse 43, he gives the first parable, which is very small. In verse 42, he says, stay awake, for you do not know on what day your Lord is coming. On verse 43, he likens that to the master of a house, that if he knew a thief was coming, he would stay awake. But since he doesn't know, he has to always be prepared. Therefore, the lesson is stay ready. You don't know when. And then in verses 45 through 51 of chapter 24, he gives the parable of the two servants, the faithful and wise servant and the wicked servant, to make the point that he may come sooner than you expect. You may think, well, it won't be soon. It may not be any time in my lifetime, so I can enjoy life, maybe enjoy it till the end, only to find out that you didn't have 70 or 80 years. You had 30 or 40 years or 50 years. And since you don't know how soon it will be before you stand before Christ, you must always be ready. But then in the parable that we look at now, in the last one, he says, you don't know how soon it's going to come. It may come sooner than expected. In this parable, he tells us that it may be longer than you expect. It may be longer than you expect, and therefore, use this time to make sure you are ready. The same point is made in all of this, is to be ready. Whether it's sooner, whether it's later, it doesn't matter. Just be ready when you see Jesus. That is the issue. The issue is being prepared. Now, as we come to this parable in chapter 25, the parable of the 10 virgins, as it's often called, one of the more popular parables of Jesus. One of the dangers that happens when people come to parables is they try to make everything in the parable mean something in the spiritual world. And not everything means something. So we don't want to over-interpret or abuse this by making every little thing mean something. But there's obvious things that have representation here. We understand that the bridegroom is Jesus. The bridegroom is Jesus, who is delayed, who has not come back yet. He is in heaven. He is with his Father, and he is waiting for the time that the Father has chosen for him to come back and establish his kingdom. So the bridegroom is Jesus. In the Old Testament, God is likened to a husband of Israel. We know most popular one would be Hosea, and that picture there of Jesus as a husband to his unfaithful bride, or God is a husband to his unfaithful bride, and Jesus picks up on that even in the Gospel of Matthew in 9:15, that he is the bridegroom, that the bridegroom is with them. In Matthew 22:2, that he is the son for whom the king has promised a wedding. So Jesus is the bridegroom. There's no issue there. Then you have these 10 virgins. These 10 virgins will clearly represent those who claim to be Christians, those who claim to be right with God, those who think they will be in the kingdom, those who think they will be with Jesus when he returns, that he will welcome them into the wedding feast. That is the representation here. Whether they are Jewish, Gentile, the issue is that these people think that they will be welcomed by God. Obviously, the delay of the bridegroom is the delay of Christ, that he has not come yet, that it is taking longer than may have been expected. Now, with that, we can work our way through this parable and see what Jesus would have us to understand concerning being ready when the bridegroom comes. And I'll just give you a few headings as we go to walk us through this passage. 25:1 will label the indistinguishable participation. The indistinguishable participation. 25:1, then the kingdom of heaven will be like 10 virgins who took their lamps and went to meet the bridegroom. Now, the scenery here is a first century wedding, and we'll just say a little bit about this so we can follow along with what's happening. We don't have a whole lot of information about what happened in a first century wedding, but we have enough to understand this parable. In the first century, like today, weddings were great times of celebration. You might have even a whole village or a whole town join in with the wedding feast and all the festivities that would take place. And so we understand that weddings then, like now, are great times to celebrate the union of a man and a wife. And so unlike today, a married or a couple who was getting married, they would not have their wedding day and then take off on a honeymoon. They would have a whole week together in celebration with the family. They would stay in that village, in that home, and they would just celebrate for a week, different things happening. It was just a great time of celebration, extended time of celebration, and the invitations would be sent out to their friends and to their family so that they would be prepared when the wedding took place. But at the beginning of this, on this first day, what would take place is the bridegroom, the groom would come into the village. And when he came, someone would be sent out. Someone with the bridegroom would be sent out to make the announcement, the groom is here. He is present, and he would wait there then for these, what is described here as 10 virgins. There weren't always 10. There could be less, and usually were less than 10. But these virgins were bridesmaids. They were young ladies, probably between the age of 12 to 18. They were virgins in that they had never been married. Those were the only ones who could be bridesmaids then. And they would go out to meet the bridegroom. They would have these, what the word used here in the ESV is lamps. They would be more like torches. So they weren't like lanterns. They were like torches, strong sticks with rags wrapped around them. You would soak it in oil and then light it, and it would obviously make a big blaze that would be sustained for a while. And then they would escort him in this procession all the way to the place where the celebration would take place. And that was their work. Before that, they would just wait with the bride until they heard the announcement that the bridegroom was close. And once they heard it, they were supposed to be ready. They were to go out to meet the bridegroom, and they would walk him and those with him to the wedding feast where all of them would take part in the festivities. Now, this would usually happen in the evening time when the blaze would show itself well from however many bridesmaids there were. But this could go on, or his delay could be any time of night. It wasn't always till midnight, as our text will tell us, but there was no particular time when they would know, oh, he's coming at this time. They just had to wait. They just had to wait until he showed up, until they heard the call that he has arrived, and then they knew that it was time for them to get into action, to go meet him, and to take part in the wedding. And so that's what's happening here. This is the imagery that Jesus is giving here for us to understand something about the kingdom of heaven, what it will be like in the end, what it will be like when Christ returns. And so you have this indistinguishable participation in that you have 10 virgins. All we know about them in verse 1 is that there are 10 virgins, 10 bridesmaids who took their lamps and went, thinking that all of them would be part of the wedding. All of them are expecting that this wedding, certainly I will be in there. I will be in this building, in this home, enjoying the blessing that has been given. That is the expectation that they have. They all look the same. No one would have looked at them and thought, oh, some of you belong here and some of you don't. They would have looked. They would have seen them making their way to the bride with their lamps. Everyone would have assumed that they were all taking part in the same event. And yet, we know that that's not going to be the case. So while verse 1 gives us an indistinguishable participation of the 10, next we have the inadequate preparation, and that's what separates the groups. Verse 2, 5 of them were foolish and 5 were wise. 5 of them did not prepare themselves. 5 of them did not do what they should have done to be part of this wedding. 5 of them were moronic, were stupid. The word means foolish. They did that which no one would have thought anybody would have done in their situation. That if you know you are the bridegroom or you are the bridesmaids, you know what your role is, you will prepare yourself in every way to fulfill that role. But 5 of them were foolish and 5 of them were wise. They were sensible. They were thoughtful about what this means and what they were supposed to do in response to it. Well, what made 5 foolish? Verse 3, for when the foolish took their lamps, their torches, they took no oil with them. And no one could have thought that anyone would be this foolish. If you have this torch and you have this cloth, everyone would have known at that time, if I light this on fire, it'll light on fire like cloth will, but it's going to have an immediate big blaze, bright blaze, and then it's very soon going to go out. It's not going to last unless I take oil, soak the cloths in oil, and then I set it on fire. Everyone would have known this. Everyone would have expected this. And yet you have these 5 foolish virgins who take the lamp. They take that which you would use and would be seen by people, but they don't take the substance, that which has to be present for the lamp to be of any use. And you might ask, well, why didn't they take it? Is it because they forgot? Is it because they misplaced it? Is it because they took it for granted that they could figure it out later or that they could borrow someone else's? And the answer from the text is it doesn't matter. Why? The reality is they didn't have what they needed. That's the point Jesus is making. They didn't have what they needed to fulfill their role in the wedding feast. So there were 5 foolish, but there were also 5 wise. And the wise did what anybody in their role would have done. They would have taken oil. They would have taken their lamps. They would have had the stick, the cloth, but they also would have had the oil with them, this flask of oil, making sure they have enough for the fire to burn to however long this procession would last. Some have said that oftentimes they would take a long route just so that they could go through the village and have this big celebration, everybody looking at their wedding party. But no matter what it is, these people understood, these ladies understood, we need oil with us, or these lamps will not last. They will not last. They were the sensible ones. They the ones did what anyone would do in their situation if they were reasonable. Now notice verse 5, because this is key here. As the bridegroom was delayed, once again, that's the issue, is being delayed, like in the parable before in 24:48. What did the wicked servant say? My master is delayed. He assumed that when actually he came sooner, but here the bridegroom is actually delayed. He actually doesn't show up when they were hoping he would. They would hope it would be a small delay where they could just go to the bride, spend a very short time with her, and get the wedding going. But this groom is delayed for whatever reason. Could have been different reasons why he couldn't come immediately, but this is not something that is unexpected. This happens, or would have happened in their time. And so all of them, in verse 5 says, they all became drowsy and slept. Now, this is not sinful. This is not wrong. They all, if you're up late you're going to fall asleep. That's just what happens. And so as they are waiting, it is nighttime. They're hoping he will show up, but he doesn't show up when they are hoping he will. So they all get sleepy. The wise ones get sleepy. The fools get sleepy. And that's expected. There's no contempt there for any of them for being drowsy and falling asleep. That's what people do. And that's the same thing. And for those who truly follow Christ and those who give a pretense of following Christ now, there's nothing that Jesus is not requiring when he says stay awake, be watchful, be alert, be ready. He's not requiring for us to do something dramatic, something out of the ordinary of normal human life. In other words, he's not saying go home today, sell all your stuff, donate it all to the church and go into full-time ministry. That's not what Jesus is talking. That's not his point of staying awake, of being alert. We ask that question of if this was my last day on earth, what would I do? But the answer is, well, you don't know because you wouldn't know it was your last day most likely. And if you did know it was your last day, that means you're in a hospital and there's nothing else you can do. And so that's not Jesus' point. The reality is they all had the same response. But as we know, some of them, while having the effect of becoming drowsy and sleeping, are still prepared, and others who were drowsy and sleepy were not. They were not. So at first we see an indistinguishable participation, and then we see the divide of the inadequate preparation. And because they didn't adequately prepare, the foolish ones didn't, they are left that way when they become drowsy and sleep, only to be interrupted by the sudden realization in verse 6, the sudden realization. But at midnight or in the middle of the night, whether it was 12 p.m. or 12 a.m. Or not, it was in the middle of the night, there was a cry, the cry that we talked about. Somebody would come out into the village and shout, "Here is the bridegroom, come out to meet him." So he is there, he is ready to take part in the wedding festivities. He has brought his people with him, he is dressed, everything is set up. Now the shout goes out, and the 10 virgins are supposed to jump into action. Well, verse 7, that's what they do. Then all those virgins rose, so they wake up, they're awakened by this call, they get up and trim their lamps. They would, any of the rags that were around this stick, this torch, that were scorched, they would just take those off, have fresh ones on there, dip those, make sure those are dipped in oil and ready to burn. That would have been the normal process. So to trim, to adorn, to decorate, but that is what takes place. But in this process, the 5 foolish ones are aware that they do not have oil. They do not have what they need to sustain the light. In essence, they're left empty. They're left unprepared. If you light it, as I said, without the oil, it will light in the beginning, but it won't last. It'll just go right back out in just a couple of minutes. But if you put the oil on, it will last. In verse 8, the foolish are figuring this out, and the foolish said to the wise, "Give us some of your oil, for our lamps go out or are going out or are being extinguished. It will not hold. The fire will not hold." They were foolish because they did not understand the obvious. The obvious is you need oil to burn the torch. You need oil to sustain the fire. You need oil to participate in the wedding feast. But they were not ready. Proverbs 13:9, the light of the righteous rejoices, but the lamp of the wicked will be put out. It can't hold. It can't be sustained. So they have to go to the wise virgins. They have to go to those who were prepared, those who had what they needed, to beg them, will you give me some of what you have? Give me some of your oil. Give me some of what I need to be part of this wedding feast. And there's not a hard process of understanding what Jesus is getting at here. That those who don't have, when they come to this time, they will go begging to get from those who do have. They will go to those who have lived by faith, those who have trusted in Christ, those who have repented of their sins, those who have demonstrated the righteousness that Christ requires from a changed life. And it will be too late. Too late to try to figure out what's missing in their Christianity, what's missing in their faith, what was missing in their repentance, what was missing in their confession. It would be too late when they realized they lived in hypocrisy, that they never had the real thing. We would like to think about the thief on the cross, but if I get to the end, then in the end I'll set it right then. I'll set it right in the end. But we treat the thief on the cross as if there were millions of them, right? The reason we refer to the thief on the cross because there was only one. And that doesn't mean people now don't have deathbed conversions. But it does mean this, that there's a big assumption that you'll have time to do that. Tell that to the 5 people in Norway who are out one day and next thing you know, they have an arrow in their chest, right? They didn't wake up thinking today is the day. Or the MP who was murdered a couple of days ago, he didn't wake up saying, oh, today is the day. The realization was today was the day, but they had no idea. And in that moment, if they didn't know Christ, maybe they did have a thought of, oh, I'm dying. How do I prepare myself? But there was no preparation. You're dying. This is it. Unless there was someone right on the spot to give them the gospel and they believed, there was no preparation. It was done. That needed to be set right before. Car accidents, heart attacks, plane crashes, whatever it may be, we do not know when. Not everyone gets a slow death. Not everyone gets a time to reflect back on life, to go and say, hey, can someone bring me someone who knows how to prepare for eternity? No, not everybody gets hours and days to sit and to think about these things. Therefore, you prepare now. You examine yourself now. You ask yourself, do I have the real thing now? That's clearly what's being emphasized here. The foolish go to the wise saying, give us some of yours. And look how the wise respond. But the wise answer saying, since there will not be enough for us and for you. That's emphatic there. There's certainly not enough. There could never possibly be enough for me to have and for you to have. I can't share what I have with you. I can't go relying on what somebody else has to make me right with Christ. Faith is not something that rubs off, right? Give me a little bit of that. No, there's nothing to give you. You need to go settle that now is the point. Settle it now. Settle it while you have the opportunity. And this is what the words of Isaiah 55 are calling out to people to say, Isaiah 55:1, come everyone who thirsts, come to the waters, and he who has no money, come buy and eat. Come buy wine and milk without money and without price. Why do you spend your money for that which is not bread, and your labor for that which does not satisfy? Listen diligently to me and eat what is good, and delight yourselves in rich food. And he goes on to say this verse that we've maybe heard many times. Isaiah 55:6, seek the Lord while he may be found. Why? Because there's a time when he won't be found. Call upon him while he is near. Why? Because there's a time when he will not hear your call. Let the wicked forsake his way, and the unrighteous man his thoughts. Let him return to the Lord, that he may have compassion on him, and to our God, for he will abundantly pardon. He will abundantly pardon. But I can't get that from my parents. Christian's not someone who was born that way. Well, I was born as a Christian. No, you were born into a Christian family. You were born as a pagan. You were born hating God. You were born rejecting God. You were born being happy, living in your sin, living for yourself, living in your pride, thinking your self-righteousness is enough to be right before God. That doesn't come from good genes. That comes from going to God, repenting, and believing in Christ alone. You don't get that from someone else. You don't get that from coming to church every Sunday. This doesn't rub off. If I sit in this room with other Christians, I'll be okay. Well, you'll be okay for now until the day when Christ says, now you must come before me. But the wise say to the foolish, since there will not be enough for us and for you, go rather to the dealers and buy for yourselves, as everyone has to do. You have to go for yourself. I can't go on behalf of anyone else, and no one can go on behalf of me. I'm not a Christian because someone did something for me. I'm not a Christian because someone sprinkled water on my head when I was a baby. I'm not a Christian because someone prayed for me. I'm a Christian because I believe in Jesus Christ. And that's it. Not because someone else believes, not because it makes them feel good, not because I hang out with them, but because I have done business with the Lord myself. That's what every Christian has to be able to say. Every Christian has to be able to say that. I went myself. I have seen myself. I have repented myself. No one else's faith secures my faith or proves my faith or says that I am ready to stand before Christ. But the lack of examination of these foolish virgins, the lack of preparation, has led to desperation. Going to these wise, to those who took the necessary steps and begging them for it, only to be left, okay, you have to go yourself. That is their sudden realization, is that they have to take care of this themselves. But because they didn't at the time when they could have, verse 10 to 12, the sober evaluation. And while they were going to buy, while they were out sorting out what they were lacking, what they were missing that would get them to the wedding, that would allow them to participate in what they were to do. While they were out doing that, the bridegroom came. They tried for last-minute preparation, and they were left going to try to find what they were missing while the bridegroom came. They're out buying, they're out looking to see what's missing, and now